Dr. Max Salfinger is currently the Chief of the Bureau of Laboratories at the Florida Department of Health. He is the former director of the Clinical Mycobacteriology Lab at the Wadsworth Center in New York. Max is on many working groups and review committees and is viewed as an international expert on TB-related laboratory issues. He is widely published, and he's a pleasure, and it's a pleasure for us to now call, that he now calls Florida home. Thanks, Max, for encouraging us all to work together, both TB program staff and the laboratories. Over to Max.
Good afternoon, good morning for the people living at the West Coast and beyond, dear colleagues and friends. It is really very exciting to facilitate this webinar on behalf of SNTC and ultimately of the Centers for Disease Control. The Effective Laboratory Program Partnership, obtaining powerful results, one could easily put this in a formula, 1 + 1 = 3. So for that reason, there is no surprise that we have today 3 speakers. And I would like to continue with my first slide about Henry David Thoreau. He died in Concord, Massachusetts, 1862 of tuberculosis. And he once said, "It matters not how small the beginning may seem to be. What is once well done is done forever." Since we don't have an awful lot of resources, or the other way around, we always have to operate with limited resources, let's do the best with what we have and have it done forever. That means, with the slogan here in Florida, assure the cure. But we need to recognize there is a teamwork. It is the physician, public health, the community, and the individual. At the height of the TB epidemic, we focused more or less on the physician capabilities, being suspicious, think TB, ordering the correct test, prescribing adequate regimens, and then recognizing that somebody actually needs to do the overseeing of medical care through public health and assuring therapy completion. But there is also a process going on before a patient sees the doctor, and that means the community shares also responsibility in a way to provide access to care. And then even earlier in the process, we need to educate all the people out there seeking care when symptoms are arising, recognizing which are the TB symptoms, and in a preventive manner maintaining health. So it really takes 4 different entities at least as a teamwork to promoting favorable outcomes for TB patients. Another person who suffered of TB and died of TB was Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady in 1962. And when we see this missed diagnosis, we need to recognize what it means in terms of errors. And the latest definition of error, adopted from cognitive psychology, used in the Institute of Medicine report, "To Err is Human" in 2000, quote, "the failure of a planned action to be completed as intended or the use of a wrong plan to achieve an aim. But to make it a little bit easier, when you apply any kind of algorithm, tests, assay, and so on, underuse or overuse or misuse of an assay or of a procedure is considered an error under this IOM definition. The relationship between program and laboratory was documented in 1906 when Robert Koch, the Nobel Prize winner and the discoverer of the TB bacterium, met Herman Bix in April 1906 in his New York City office. And he was on his way, Robert Koch, to attend the International World TB Conference held later in Washington, D.C. And just at the side, Bix and Koch, they knew each other because Bix actually studied in Berlin. And quote from the biography written by Winslow in 1929, Koch was particularly impressed with the promptness and completeness of the service he saw rendered by the health department of New York City, that a physician could leave a throat culture, sputum, at a drugstore in his neighborhood at 5 p.m. and be sure of receiving a report by telephone before 10 a.m. the next morning was a remarkable achievement. And I would say 100 years later, it is still a remarkable achievement, and globally and even in our country, we are not able to do the same thing for the entire country. So Koch continues, you will agree, my dear Bix, that most of these bacteriological and serological discoveries have come from Germany. For my part, I must admit with shame that we in Germany are years and years behind you in the practical application. You have done marvelous work. And so here we have the researcher, the laboratorian, admiring in a way the public health officer in New York City for translating laboratory services into program successes. There are several junctures for the program and the laboratory to interact. The picture shows the so-called Blue Henry, the term coined in The Magic Mountain by the writer Mann, and describing the sanatorium life in the Swiss Alps. And the Blue Henry is a sputum collection device, and you can see on the bottom, after you collect the sputum, you actually can then properly dispose the sputum and not spitting on the floor. The juncture for program and laboratory interaction, the laboratorians have no control over when a decision needs to be made to collect sputum, and then actually how the sputum is collected and how the specimen is shipped to the laboratory. Once it receives in the laboratory, it gets accessioned, processed, making AFB slides, inoculating liquid and solid medium, and reporting AFB results. And here it is important already to know with what type of a patient we are dealing with. Because the next question is, are we doing nucleic acid amplification, then reporting the nucleic acid amplification result, reporting a positive culture, MTB complex versus non-tuberculous mycobacteria, performing reporting final identification for TB complex, first-line drugs for susceptibility results and second-line drugs. For all these various steps, time is of essence, and oftentimes instant results are demanded. But we need to recognize that if some results are delayed compared to bacteriological results like Staphylococcus aureus or E. coli and so on, there are some biological differences in the organism compared to tuberculosis. The generation time of Staphylococcus, here a culture, is just 20 minutes. If you culture the sputum, you have a visible colony the next morning. In terms of tuberculosis, here red-stained, the AFB bacilli, we have a generation time of 20 hours. So we cannot always blame the laboratory for this type of differences. Where we really need to focus more, or one could say what is hot, we need to focus on patient-oriented, shortest turnaround time possible, molecular assays, electronic reporting. I will not go further into the aspect of electronic reporting, just here a note that we need to strive for this type of the network as well. But it's obvious that there is no equal opportunity for TB specimens. And what this means is, if the patient is smear positive, if the patient is HIV positive, or if there is a suspicion for drug resistance, multi-drug resistant or extended drug resistant XDR, then we should not apply the same assays and do the batching. With other words, say no to one size fits all. Early on, our educator mentioned double trouble, and it meant the co-infection of TB with HIV. Today, we have to add drug resistance and then use the term triple threat. But where it's really important for the interaction between the program and the laboratory starts with the quality sputum. If the laboratory doesn't receive a quality sputum, one cannot do quality testing. Or as the saying is in this country, garbage in, garbage out. We need to know if this specimen is a diagnostic specimen versus a follow-up specimen. We need to know if the patient was already started on treatment. We have a 7-day window for the nucleic acid amplification. If the treatment is already a week, 2, or even longer ago started, then there is no need to do nucleic acid amplification. Congregate setting, respiratory isolation, drug resistance suspected. Or from a public health perspective, a recommendation if a acid-fast bacilli smear positive has been reported from a non-public health laboratory, it makes an awful lot of sense to collect an additional sputum for the entire works at the public health laboratory, and then the specimen and all the results thereof are already within the system, and the surveillance people, the TB control people, they all have then immediate access to this data. But the question comes, is the laboratory really asking for all this information on the request form? And on the flip side, is the TB program or the care provider providing all this information to the laboratory? Relatively new, the laboratory got a new responsibility. We are not any longer only used to facilitate and to confirm the diagnosis. It's also now used for patient management. And this is especially true since the new TB treatment guidelines were out now already for several years, but many people may not be aware with its implication. When there is an initial cavitation on the X-ray and the culture is still positive, taken after 2 months of treatment, then the INH rifampin combination need to be extended from 4 to 7 months, resulting ultimately in a 9-month regimen and not any longer in a 6-month regimen. To determine that the culture actually is negative at month 2, we have to collect additional specimen, and the recommendation is, if the initial smear is negative, at least once a month. If the smear is positive, bi-weekly. However, the jury is still out there if this means 1 sputum specimen or 2 sputum specimen per time event. Nucleic acid amplification, and here we will have the first question for polling. And the question is, does your laboratory, and this is the question for lab staff, and then we have the same question for the non-lab staff. Lab staff, does your TB laboratory perform nucleic acid amplification methods on all AFP smear positive sputum specimens from a new patient? If yes, please click yes. If no, please click no.
We'll give you a few moments to lab staff to go ahead and enter your answer, and then we'll give the opportunity for the TB program staff to answer. So hang in there.
Now the opportunity for the program staff, including the nurse and all the other who consider themselves program staff. Does your TB laboratory perform nucleic acid amplification methods on all AFP smear positive sputum specimens from new patients?
Just a few minutes more while we give the TB program staff an opportunity to enter their information.
Now we go back to the results for the laboratory. And you recognize that 2/3 answered yes and 1/3 with no. And the results for the program, I would say, more or less identical. While these results are certainly assuring, we would like to have more coverage than only 2/3. And why am I saying that? Because nucleic acid amplification assay, two commercial brands are available. Smear positives were approved by FDA more than 10 years ago, and the smear negative September 99, and there are guidelines originally published July 7, 2000 in the Morbidity Mortality Weekly Report under revision. So to have 12 years, almost 12 years after an assay is FDA approved, and still 1/3 do not have access either in this poll by the laboratorians or by the program, I think we need to work very hard to make this a faster implementation. Here I show a publication, a table published by Doug Moore, Orange County Public Health Laboratory out in California, published in 2005. What his laboratory did, comparing 3 sputum specimens with smear microscopy with sensitivity, specificity, positive predictive value, negative predictive value, and then turnaround time. 3 specimens for smear. Only the first sputum specimen was used for nucleic acid amplification, 3 for the BACTEC, 12 B vials, broth medium, 3 for Lowenstein-Jensen, solid medium, 3 for a selective 7H11 Middlebrook agar, and then the total of all these 3 culture mediums together with the 3 specimen, 96% sensitivity, AFB at 70%, calculating all 3, and nucleic acid amplification, believe it or not, came up with only one assay to a sensitivity with a 90% and specificity 100% as with all the others. With other words, nucleic acid amplification, I would say, is better than its reputation, and we need to do all what we can to have this available wherever it's deemed necessary. TB, HIV, when we talk about TB, HIV, then we can go back to the original MDR TB outbreak investigations carried out by CDC and health departments at the peak of the TB epidemic, 8 hospitals and 1 prison, and we should not forget at that time the proportion of HIV co-infection in these outbreaks were very high, with only 1 being relatively low, 14%, but everything else, 80, 90, some of them 100%. The percent of death also very high, and this is the stunning part. If HIV and TB are together, the median time from the diagnosis to death in weeks is very, very short. And that means we certainly need to have more rapid assays, meaning faster turnaround time. Drug-resistant, multi-drug-resistant TB, and XDR. Here we go to the next polling. For the laboratory staff, in your estimation, what is the turnaround time for most, meaning 80%, drug susceptibility testing results from date the sputum specimen is collected until the results are reported? 2 weeks or less, 3 to 4 weeks, 5 weeks or longer. Time the specimen collected until the results are reported regardless of smear positivity or smear negative. We go to the program staff, the same question. In your estimation, what is the turnaround time for most 80% drug susceptibility testing results from the date the sputum specimen is collected until the results are reported? The results for the laboratory, the majority reports in 61% that it takes only between 3 and 4 weeks until the lab result is reported back to the submitter from the time the specimen was collected. And now for the program, they don't agree, obviously, what we in the laboratory believe the turnaround time is. Just a bare majority, 51%, actually says it takes 5 weeks or longer. There is another aspect with drug resistance, and I'm very proud that 2 co-authors of this publication, Dr. Narita and Dr. Ashkin, are actually a speaker also during this webinar, but it is important to point out MDR TB cases in Florida 94 through 97, there were 81 patients where they did the chart review, and if the patient one way or another had the service from H.E. Holly, a dedicated TB hospital for treatment for patient hard to take care of in medical terms, 80% cure rate versus patient not having access to this great service of H.E. Holly, only 48%. And this is published in the Chest in 2001. So it really shows us how crucial it is access to care, and we need to say to special care, so we have the maximum of the cure rate. When we talk about drug resistance, then it might be worthwhile to talk about what are the definitions, and the WHO case definition was revised for XDR just about yesterday, a year ago, and the goals for this revision was suited for public health surveillance, reliable drug susceptibility methodology, clinical relevance, and relatively simple. Then the actual definition is resistance to at least INH and rifampin, plus resistance to a fluoroquinolone, and one of the second-line injectable drugs, amikacin, kanamycin, or capreomycin. Another great resource for drug-resistant TB, the Francis J. Curry National TB Center in San Francisco, published 2005, a great survival guide for a clinician, and all the experts through the entire country participated in this wonderful work, is currently undergoing a revision, and here at their website one can freely access, free of charge, this terrific survival guide. Now, what does that really mean, drug resistance? And from a laboratory perspective, and also historically, Dennis Mitchison from UK defined drug resistance as a decrease in sensitivity of sufficient degree to be reasonably certain that the strain concerned is different from a sample of wild strains that have never come into contact with the drug. And you can recognize this is not an easy definition to translate into any type of laboratory assays. And it's no surprise that there is not a single assay considered in a way the best assay. However, historically 7H10 in this country, Middlebrook agar is considered the gold standard. Bactec, radiometric, and the non-radiometric, I use one of these three commercially available systems, and then the 7H11. But what is really important for INH, for instance, in all these assays, the laboratory tests two different concentrations. For ethambutol, some of them, streptomycin, the same. So if the surveillance staff is capturing in their database only INH resistance, we are missing a point of low and high level resistance, as these two different concentrations are referred to. And also we need to know not only which concentration but which method were used. When we talk about drug resistance mutation, Hugo David, at that time director of the CDC TB laboratory, originally from Portugal, and he retired back to Portugal, 1970, published a study where he came up with some estimates what is the natural probability for a mutation monoresistant to INH, roughly up to 100 million, 1 in 100 million would have a natural drug resistance mutation for monoresistant, and up to 3.5 million. And the same then for rifampin, a little bit higher, and ethambutol and streptomycin more or less the same as for INH. But if you do now the math for NDR, then the executive summary would be a mutant resistant to both INH and rifampin would be really, 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 really rare. And if you do the math, then it's not any longer to the 10th power or to the 8th power. We are talking now about minus 18, and I actually had to go to the dictionary to figure out what a number is called with 18 zeros, and it's quintillion. So the probability is for an NDR naturally occur in this model between 4 quintillion to 420 trillion. We have no way to apprehend how big these numbers are. But George Canetti, in Answer to Pasteur, he came up with a rough estimate how many bacteria are actually in a cavity, and he counted just about 100 million. Therefore, if we have clinical multi-drug resistant, it's not a natural phenomenon. It is man-made because we cultured, we amplified the multi-drug resistant mutum, and ultimately it became the dominant bacteria load, since all the susceptible ones are killed. And he published this in the 1965 Blue Journal of the American Thoracic Society. Already in 1993, Amalio Talenti aligned the RPOB genes for E. coli and compared it with M. tuberculosis and recognized upper level is E. coli and lower level is M. tuberculosis, that some of the point mutation actually occur more or less at the same spot. And subsequent testing confirmed that there is a high correlation, more than 96%, between the gold standard 7H10 arc of proportion method and the findings of a RPOB mutation, similar PZA with the PNCA, but with INH, since INH has various mode of actions, there are different genes involved, and the correlation then with these genes compared to INH resistant is not totaling up. That means we are still missing some INH genes. One can do the traditional sequencing, manually check the sequence for any mutation, wild versus what you have in the clinical sample, and in this particular case, at the codon 526, there is a C replaced with a G, which then changes the amino acid and resolves in a resistant strain. It's certainly easier to do it with line probes, and we have here two commercial entities out, Immunogenetics from Belgium and the genotype MTBDR from Hein Life Science in Germany. The latest development with the paper strips, where there are various wild types and then various controls and then the mutation, and wherever there is a probe according then to the signature, one can easily detect for INH, CAT-G, corresponding to the high-level INH and RPOB mutations. This is the PCR machine, and this is an automate for hybridization if one has a higher throughput. The publication I was involved while still in Albany in the Journal of Clinical Micro, published 2006. It was clear that the turnaround time, if we use smear positive leftover sediment, we have the result just in 1 to 2 days, versus conventionally between 2 and 2.5 weeks. The sensitivity for the amplification, since it's out of the sediment, was almost as good as the MTD, which is used in Albany at that time, with almost 95%, and among the ones where we have a successful amplification, CAT-G was picked up almost 95% and RPOB 91%. It is not 100%, but all mutations detected within 1 or 2 days out of the sediment from these smear positive specimens, they were all confirmed with drug resistance. However, the culture confirming the drug resistance took 2, 3, sometimes even 4 weeks. So we have a faster result for the drug resistance. It's not total 100%, but also we didn't have any false positives. With the Rifampin resistance, there are certainly several assays, as we just pointed out with the RPOV analysis with line probe, 1 or 2 days after the sediment, with radiometric, non-radiometric method, ARGA-based, radiometric, non-radiometric 1 week after the culture is positive, ARGA-based 3 weeks after the culture is positive, and Löwenstein-Jensen egg-based 4 weeks after the culture is positive. And here with the RPOV, you can use either a sediment from smear-positive samples or a culture grown up as TB and then do the RPOV. In other words, instant results are possible, but the TB laboratory does not have the resources to treat the expedited and the more sophisticated testing for all specimens. That means we need to have a triage process before we do any of the sophisticated testing. The 4 big state TB laboratory already described methodologies for faster turnaround time in 2000, California, Florida, New York, and Texas. And the APHL, together with the CDC, they reported in 2004 on a task force, the future of TB laboratory services, quote, "The critical next step will be to develop an integrated system that ensures timely laboratory testing and the timely flow of information among laboratorians, clinicians, and TB controllers." In closing, we certainly need to have a paradigm shift. The Healthy People 2010, and these targets were put together in 2000, and there are just 4 TB targets: reduce TB, target number 1 new case per 100,000 population, increase the proportion of all TB patients who complete curative therapy within 12 months. The target is 90% of these patients. Increase the proportion of contacts and other high-risk persons with LTBI, latent tuberculosis infection, who complete the course of treatment, 85%. And the number 4 is where we are today interested in, reduce the average time for a laboratory to confirm and report TB cases. And the target is 2 days for 75% of the cases, and more or less that means we need to apply nucleic acid amplification. And here comes the third question. Laboratory staff. Healthy People 2010 reduced the average time for a laboratory to confirm and report TB cases. Target 2 days for 75% of cases. Did you already reach this target? And for the TB program staff, the same question. Confirmation of the TB laboratory diagnosis for 75% of the cases within 2 days. The results show that only in 1 quarter we actually meet the goal of Healthy People 2010, and we have only a few years left. So we really need to dramatically change the way we make available newer technology. and the same ratio is only 1/4, where TB control program says we meet the goal, and 3/4 not. So that means we certainly cannot treat every specimen the same way, and only with a close relationship between caregiver, especially TB control program, and laboratory, we should be able to increase these numbers in order to meet target number 4. And just to remind everybody, if the patient is AFB positive, if the patient is HIV positive, if there is any suspicion for drug resistance, that means these specimens need to be on a fast track, and I would even say they need to be on a fast track USA. Coming back, 1 + 1 = 3, the laboratory and the TB control program. The importance of the close working relationship, I hope I was able to demonstrate some of the junctures where it's really crucial. The two speakers, Dr. Ashkin and Dr. Narita, they will point out what they, in their day-to-day life experience when they are using novel diagnostics. Thank you so much for right now.
Thank you very much, Max. We appreciate you presenting this information and sharing the information of where partnerships between TB programs and labs can play an integral role in the management and outcome of a patient's care. Now I'll move on to our next speaker, who is Dr. David Ashkin. He is the Medical Director for the Southeastern National TB Center and the Medical Executive Director of the A.G. Holly State TB Hospital in Lantana, Florida, and that's the site of our clinical training site for the SNTC. Additionally, Dave is the State TB Health Officer for the Florida Department of Health, and he holds positions with several universities. Today, Dr. Ashkin will present a Florida case that illustrates the successful use of nucleic acid amplification and the benefit experienced by the TB program staff. Dave?
Karen, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate that, and it's great to be with you guys today. And I want to first start by thanking Max for a couple different things. First, obviously, for a great presentation, but as importantly, if not more importantly, is for all the leadership and all of the great, assistance he's always given all of us, and he's been our great teacher. And to Max's leadership, to Max's teachings, I can't thank him enough. I really want to emphasize a point that Max made, but really is true for us day to day. I mean, I don't know of too many days where I'm not on the phone with one of my laboratorian colleagues. And I want to emphasize this point, as I think we all feel, as a clinician, if I don't have my lab, I mean, I'm missing a key point of my team, and I need that. I need my lab, I need their results, and I need them to be a partner in order to control tuberculosis. And they need to be a partner not only from the perspective, in my opinion, for how to do lab tests and how to perform them and get them in a timely manner, but as importantly, they have to understand what I need. And then obviously, I need to understand what they need. And what I'd like to do is I really like to present this case, which is obviously a true case, just to give you an illustration of one case, but I can tell you there's so many more instances. But this is one where if I didn't have my lab, I'd be in a lot of trouble. So the first presentation, first slide there is, I'm going to present a case. It's a case of Miss H.M. She's a 20-year-old white female. She had a history of congenital valvular heart disease with pulmonary hypertension. She had a 3-month history of productive cough. She was having dyspnea on exertion and a weight loss of 10 pounds. And what happened was that she needed a new valve. And what they wanted to do is they did a chest x-ray as a preoperative evaluation. And when they did that x-ray, she had a left upper lobe cavity, which I'll show you in a second. She also was found as part of the workup to have a PPD with 10 millimeters of induration, and she had no known exposure to TB that we could find whatsoever. This is her x-ray, and as you can see here, in the left upper lobe, she has this very, very thin-walled cavity. Not quite typical of a typical case of TB, but as we all know, there is no such thing as a typical case of TB. But it's very, very thin-walled. And I want to show you on a close-up on the next slide how thin that wall was. So here we are. We have a patient who has this left upper lobe cavity. You know, we're thinking, you know, that she has a positive PPD, that this definitely could be tuberculosis. Next, please. So we go ahead and we do sputums on them, and sure enough, 2 out of 3 sputums are smear positive. The health department sees it. They start her on 4 drugs. They notify the health department, and as part of the contact investigation, they find that she lived in a dormitory with over 200 other students. And when they went further, they found that she had gone to classes with another 400 students. And I think for all of us in public health, this is a nightmare. And this is something that we all deal with every day. And of course, for me, what made this even a worse nightmare, of course, this was happening on a Friday afternoon. We got this whole thing actually on a Thursday afternoon. And of course, it was towards the end of the semester, and everybody was about to go home. So there was always this sense of we have to get the results right now, because if we're going to do the contact investigation, we have to do it before they go home for summer break. So what happened is, what's our traditional public health response? Normally we'd isolate the patient, we start them on meds, and we do a contact investigation. And I think when you're looking at this, you know, there's obviously all the aspects of the resources we would need, you know, from the health department to carry this investigation out. There's also the cost. But one of the things I think all of us in public health also have to deal with, which we rather not, is what I call the mass hysteria costs, all those phone calls you get from the press, the parents, and everybody else. So this was, we've been doing nucleic acid amplifications in Florida for about a little over 10 years now. And this case was one of our early ones, and it taught us something, because what happened, as you see on the next slide, is we got 3 sputums on her, and all were AFB positive, but notice all were MTD, or nucleic acid amplification negative. And as such, we postponed the investigation. I also want to make a statement. Obviously, once we got back to first, it was NAA negative, a nucleic acid amplification negative. We repeated it again, and we also tested for inhibitors, and all of them were negative. And as such, we were able to, postpone the investigation, and subsequently, all the cultures grew out MAI. So next, please. So, I guess the bottom line came down to this taught us a very important lesson. And first was, as soon as this was happening, we called the lab, and I told them, look, I need my results fast, because I need to make a decision. And sure enough, that Friday morning, we had the specimens to them, we had the results in our hands, and we were able to make a decision fast. And without the health departments having that cooperation from the labs, and the labs understanding what we need, and vice versa, we having the resources of the labs, we could never have done this. And I can't say that this is only one of many, many cases where good communication and having the lab have the tools we need to make rapid decisions was essential. And as you guys know, the MTD is very specific for results, as Max had talked to you about, AFB smears, and it can be proven to be very cost-effective for public health and other agencies. And we just wanted to use that as one case and example, because we always talk about the importance of a positive nucleic acid amplification. But I think what this case really emphasizes also, there's a lot to be said for negative results. And in this case, it really saved us. So I want to thank everybody for participating, and we'll answer some questions later. Karen?
Thank you, Dave. Thanks for giving us that example of how the lab was able to assist you in preventing a large contact investigation. Now I'd like to turn over to our third speaker, Dr. Masa Narita. And Masa Narita is the director of the TB Control Program in Seattle, Washington. He serves as faculty for various TB courses for the Francis J. Curry National TB Center, and he holds faculty positions within the University of Washington. Masa will now present a case where lab and programs partnered to address an outbreak in Seattle. Masa?
Hi, good afternoon. I'd like to share our experience of effective partnerships between TB laboratories and TB programs in Washington State. Next slide, please. Yes. In 2002, Seattle, we recorded 158 cases of active TB, the highest number of TB cases since 1969. Next. We realized that the increase of TB cases was partly driven by the increased number of TB cases among the homeless in Seattle. Typically, there are 12 to 15 cases of active TB among the homeless each year in Seattle, King County. But over the course of 2002, a total of 30 cases of TB was observed. This graph shows homeless TB patients in King County by month of diagnosis, and each box represents one case of active TB. This is the first example of powerful partnership between TB laboratories and TB programs, and it is about getting genotyping results in a timely manner. Many of King County TB patients are diagnosed at the Harborview Medical Center, which is owned by King County and managed by the University of Washington. In addition to Harborview Medical Center Lab, King County Public Health Lab, Washington State Public Health Lab, and the local nonprofit organization, Seattle Biomedical Research Institute, and CDC Lab have worked very closely to detect the homeless outbreak strain in a timely manner. Next, please. This chart shows the result of genotyping. The red box represents one identical strain of MTB, and the light blue boxes represent different unique strains. The genotyping results revealed in 2002, 17 of 30 homeless TB cases were caused by one identical strain of MTB. 1/3 of outbreak cases were HIV positive, and approximately half of the outbreak cases were Native American. Next. The findings from the lab system and EPI information resulted in a community partnership approach, and we created a community TB coalition. Multiple community agencies, not only lab and TB programs, but also jail health program, healthcare for the homeless network, health system partners such as Harborview Medical Center, community clinics and Indian Health Services, and homeless agencies such as shelters and day centers. This coalition was enormously helpful in our searches and in offering additional information and insight on behaviors and patterns of the particular contacts of this outbreak. Next, please. This slide shows detection of active TB cases through 3 different approaches. Prior to TB outbreak, we used to screen over 1,000 homeless clients per year. And for example, we found one case over a 12-month period in 2002. From the beginning to detection of the outbreak among the homeless, we followed traditional contact investigation procedures and detected 2 cases from 1,058 contacts screening. When we moved to intensive screening, which included chest X-ray and spot sputum collection, the detection of active TB cases through screening increased to 9 cases over a 3-month period. Next, please. Next, please. Yep, thanks. Not yet. Back one, right. This slide shows the case detection of 2 different screening methods. While we are finding more cases with active TB, we encountered a challenging situation. That is, more cases turned out to be smear negative due to HIV infection, diabetes, and other underlying medical conditions. Chest X-rays from some patients revealed low level infiltrates or atypical features. As the cost of isolation, TB treatment, and DOT became enormous, While we understand that smear-negative cases could transmit TB, especially in a shelter setting, we really needed to triage smear-negative potential TB suspects. Next, please. We closely worked with Washington State TB Control Program, Kinfield, and Washington State Public Health Lab so that amplified MTD can be used in this outbreak situation. In the past, Washington State Public Health Lab used to offer MTD once a week, but responding to this outbreak, they came to offer MTD twice weekly so that TB program could utilize our resources more efficiently and effectively. Next, please. This is the last slide of my talk, illustrating that TB outbreak among the homeless in Seattle have been contained thanks to effective partnerships between TB labs and TB programs and other agencies. Again, each red box represents a TB case with an identical outbreak strain. We continue to see sporadic outbreak-associated cases because many are exposed, but we have difficulty assuring the completion of INH preventive therapy among this group. This is the end of my talk, and thank you so much for your attention.
Great. Thank you, Masa. We appreciate you participating today.
This webinar demonstrated in a way the importance of a close relationship between laboratorians and program staff, and I would actually say you all are ambassadors for powerful results. Our polling, even it's not the Nobel Prize winning science, demonstrated that we still have ample opportunity to improve. And I just pictured here 3 people who truly are ambassadors. General Marshall, after World War II, developed the Marshall Plan. Dag Hammarskjöld, the second UN Secretary from Sweden, and Harlem Gro Brundtland, the Director General at the World Health Organization, just recently. And I would like to thank all of you for participating, and we are opening up this now for questions.
Great. We're going to take questions now on a first-come basis. So if you're at your computer, you may text in your question. Remember to enter it into the bottom line of the question and answer dialog box and click the button that says Ask to send your question to us. We'll be monitoring those questions as they are received, and we have received a few, and we will post those to our faculty in a moment. For those of you that are on telephone connection, the operator will come on now and give instructions to you to ask your question via the telephone.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to register a question, please press the 1 followed by the 4 on your telephone. You will hear a 3-tone prompt to acknowledge your request. Your line will then be briefly accessed from the conference to obtain information. If your question has been answered and you would like to withdraw your registration, please press the star followed by the 0. If you are using a speakerphone, please lift your handset before entering your request. One moment, please, for the first question.
We have received our first question through the computer, and this one I'm going to pose to Dr. David Ashkin. The question is regarding NAA testing.
Oh, thanks, Karen. We actually have gotten a couple of different questions that all pertain to a similar topic, which is, there's disclaimers on the NAA specifically that you should only use it within 7 days of treatment and not use it afterwards. Max, why are those disclaimers there, and what are some of the disclaimers for the nucleic acid amplification test?
The 7-day disclaimer is more or less from FDA approved package insert. The nucleic acid amplification test was validated for the diagnostic purpose and not for patient management as a surrogate marker for viability, for instance. And therefore, to have a valid result for the MTD, according to the package insert, the patient should not be longer under treatment than 7 days.
Right. I mean, you know, we get this a lot, and the other thing where we see it is just to remind people there's two sides to it. Max brought up the first side, that potentially if you're on therapy for more than 7 days, potentially, obviously, the organism may be non-viable and you may get a negative test. But on the other end of it, remember that we're dealing with nucleic acids, and they stay around for quite some time, even after the organism is dead. And it's not uncommon that we may see patients who've been on therapy for quite some time and still have positive nucleic acid amplification tests. And that's why it's really not a good test, I think you'd agree, Max, to use as a follow-up. It's really to be used as a diagnostic. And even in patients who had TB before, maybe a year before, we've occasionally seen patients who continue to have a positive nucleic acid amplification test, which makes it difficult to interpret.
And since there are two commercial assays available, the disclaimers are different for each, and some laboratories may even use an in-house developed assay, and the disclaimer obviously is also different. So we cannot give a standard answer in terms of the actual text needed, but this is certainly something the laboratory the program is using will provide the disclaimer for any kind of nucleic acid amplification test.
Yeah, Max, we got another email here, and the question is, do you perform drug susceptibility testing for first-line drugs in multi-drug resistant cases?
Susceptibility testing since the early 90s, CDC recommends that on all first-time diagnosed patients that susceptibility is performed, and we actually do this as a reflex testing in the public health laboratory. And we will repeat the susceptibility test in some laboratories after 2 months, others say after 3 months, again automatically with the understanding that maybe the drug resistance pattern may have shifted.
And one more from an email, then we're going to switch over to the telephone callers. But I have, given the goal of a 2-day turnaround time for lab confirmation of TB, Max, are you suggesting that cultures no longer be done?
As you recognize, the 2-day target is for 75% of the cases. And obviously, TB cases, as they are counted within the public health surveillance, there are about only 80% of those have culture positivity, and that means among these 80%, the target will be 75%. So nucleic acid amplification gives you a rapid diagnosis, but certainly it does not eliminate culture, because you may still have, and as the study from Doug Moore demonstrated, the sensitivity there was 90%, so 10% were missing, but these guys you pick up then with the culture. And we still need the culture for the various compounds. I used the rapid susceptibility on a molecular basis for INH and rifampin. For all the other compounds, there is right now no commercial entity available to do rapid testing, and therefore we need a culture for then the susceptibility testing against the other compounds.
Exactly. If we can, for a second, take some, if there's questions on the phone, if we can take a question from our callers, please identify yourself first, and if you wouldn't mind, tell us where you're from.
Ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, to register for a question, press the 1 followed by the 4. An operator will then briefly access your line to obtain information. One moment, please, for the next question.
Yeah, I'm not hearing any questions on the phone line, so what I'd like to do is ask another question. And please, if you have questions on the phone line, we'll pause and we'll bring them in. But we have another one that came in from email. I think a lot of you, and I don't blame you guys, rather email than hear yourselves on the phone. I understand. I'd rather not hear myself right now. But the question is, should the PCR line probe assays for identification and detection of resistance to INH and rifampin be confirmed by culture?
As I mentioned, results only for INH and rifampin gives the TB controller not the entire picture, and the people, the professional staff providing care, they need other results of the susceptibility test, and therefore we still need the culture.
This is Dave Ashkin again. Masa, are you still on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
I have a question for you. Actually, it's coming from one of our participants, and they're asking, could you review the difference between standard contact investigation as opposed to an intense contact investigation? And Masa, knowing you only do intense things, right?
Well, the standard screening, meaning we place first of all, we interview the patients to see if they have a TB symptoms and place skin testing. That's a traditional standard method. Intensive one was that because there was so many cases out of a few centers, we automatically collected a sputum doing an X-ray on every single contact. So that was intensive one. Again, I really don't recommend for routine setting, but if there's a big outbreak of TB and you see so many cases from contacts, that's one method to control tuberculosis.
Hey, thanks, Masa. We have another question from email, which is, which specific members of the TB complex should be differentiated other than MTB, M. bovis, and M. bovis BCG? Max?
Although in this country for decades we do not vaccinate any longer with the BCG vaccine, however, BCG is still used for bladder cancer treatment, and therefore if somebody identifies only MTB complex, we don't have the full picture if this is actually M. bovis BCG or M. tuberculosis. And by the same token, M. bovis, I agree with the person who asked the question that the three most important entities within M. tuberculosis complex is certainly TB, bovis, and bovis BCG. If we actually would include Africanum, then you would have more data to demonstrate if actually Mycobacterium africanum is different from M. tuberculosis in terms of surveillance, in terms of cure rate, and so on. But foremost, I would say only M. tuberculosis complex is not sufficient in this country.
All right. Is there any calls or questions on the phone lines?
There are no questions on the phone line.
Thank you very, very much. Appreciate that. Max, as part of the polling questions that came through, one of the things I thought was very interesting is that 2/3 of the participants said that they do have access on smear-positive specimens to NAA. We got in a couple different questions, but one is, can you do it on smear-negative, the NAAs? But I think as importantly is, I know that they're saying 2/3 are available, but the question is in what time frame? I know many places are batching NAAs, meaning they're only doing it once a week. So does that kind of interfere with the rapid turnaround time that even if you have access to NAA, if they're not done, on a regular basis? What's your comments on that?
The more frequently we do nucleic acid amplification, obviously, the shorter the turnaround time, and in some busy state public health laboratories, they may do it 3 times a week. And for instance, in our own Jacksonville laboratory in Florida, the MTD is done Monday through Saturday daily. The only day we are not doing nucleic acid amplification is on Sunday. They still do the susceptibility and so on, but only Monday through Saturday we do the nucleic acid amplification, and for that reason it may be more cost efficient if the nucleic acid amplification may be done not necessarily in every laboratory, rather combined in a region or so to make it more rapid turnaround time.
And on that same, going further, they're asking what is the validity of the NAA on non-pulmonary specimens, and again, the question on smear-negative specimens.
As I mentioned, the FDA-approved assay is for the commercial test kit from GeneProbe since September 1999. Roche with the Amplicor did not seek approval for the smear-negative respiratory specimen. For none of the non-pulmonary specimen, there is FDA approval, and therefore, if somebody does it actually, it needs to be reflected then in the disclaimer which goes along with the laboratory result.
Yeah, and the other questions are, there's some great questions here. One of the questions are, and this is, I guess, for you to speculate a little, Max, but they're saying, what are the implications for changes in clearance protocols for public health authorities? Meaning, I think what they're asking is, do you think that the NAA may have a role in ruling out tuberculosis, especially in, let's say, hospital settings or in the community?
Right now, most of the studies are actually done to rule in, and certainly this is another way of application beyond the smear negative, and maybe then to rule out necessarily one test may be not enough, and perhaps 2 nucleic acid amplification may be done, and together with the clinical picture, one may have then this additional result to make the decision to honor or not to honor the nucleic acid amplification result. But the morbidity mortality weekly report from July 7 in 2000 is currently under revision, and I am sure at one point with the new guidelines this aspect will be addressed.
Okay, and then for a final question that we have from the email, and one of course to really challenge you, is the question is, how will nucleic acid amplification be made, how can it be made available to areas without, let's say, adequate resources?
I don't feel that this is actually a challenging question. It all comes down to priority setting, and the laboratory can do only so much. So if it's for the program important, then together the laboratory and the program, they need to determine the priorities, and certainly they could not request that nucleic acid amplification is done with an additional infusion of funds. And therefore, again, this demonstrates how important it is with a close relationship, TB control program and the laboratory.
Well, thank you very much, Max, Dave, and Masa. We appreciate you providing the answers to all the questions, and thank you, participants, for sending in so many questions. We appreciate your participation, too. Right now, I want to return to some of the information that I shared with you earlier related to the evaluation and continuing education information. All of those who logged in today will receive an email from the SNTC that will contain a web link, and this is for an online survey to evaluate this session today. Please be sure to complete this survey, and additionally, if other people participated in the room with you, please forward the link on to them so that they can also evaluate this event. And this is absolutely essential if they want to get continuing education, those physicians and nurses out there. Certificates for the physicians and nurses will be mailed to the address that's entered into this online survey, so it's very important that you do complete this survey. We won't be able to send you a certificate unless you complete the survey. And if you have any questions, please give us a call at SNTC. I'd like to make you aware that all of the RTMCCs, the Regional Training and Medical Consultation Centers, have consultation lines to be able to answer questions just like the ones that were received today. The SNTC's hotline is 1-800-4TB-INFO, so if you're within our region, we welcome you to give us a call. We have some upcoming events with the Southeastern National Tuberculosis Center that I want to make you aware of. We have a webinar series that will be kicked off next Wednesday. So if you haven't registered for this event, we welcome you to participate in next week's event. This is a series on pediatric TB, primarily for the private provider, and it will cover topics such as epidemiology and pathogenesis of childhood TB, latent TB infection in kids, clinical manifestations and the evaluation of a pediatric patient, and then treatment and control of TB in kids. That all occurs and concludes every Wednesday through November 7th. Don't miss our clinical TB course that occurs in Lantana, Florida at A.G. Holly Hospital. The next course will be December 3rd through the 6th. And the following day, that week on a Friday, we have our TST Train the Trainer course. Please come down and join us sometime. And last but not least, to close out our year for the SNTC, we have a TB and corrections course. This one's focusing on contact investigation and discharge planning within the corrections, and that's in the middle of December, the 11th through the 13th, and that will be held in Jacksonville, Florida. To find out more information about these events, please come to our website, sntcmedicine.ufl.edu. Now, you all may know that this was a national webinar, and all of the RTMCCs are hosting a national webinar every year. The next one will be hosted by the Heartland Center, and their topic is TB-HIV Managing the Co-Infected Patient with Tim Sterling. This will occur November 27th. Be sure to register through the Heartland TB Center's website. Please visit our website for upcoming events, and we thank you very much for joining us today.